I'm so excited about this book I'm going to share with you, Spying and the Crown. I first heard about it, actually, the Royal Grift, that channel. She did a little bit on it, and immediately I went and purchased the book because it just sounded fascinating. And I'm so glad I did, because it is fascinating. It tells you about the relationship between intelligence services and the Crown, and intelligence services and the government and the Crown. And it is just fascinating because it has all changed so much. The landscape has changed so much, particularly through a really key period in the 60s and the 70s. So I'm going to share a few little exciting tales from this book, and also quite a funny one about the then Prince Charles. Now, when I'm talking about the Queen, I am, of course, talking about Queen Elizabeth II when I'm referring to the Queen in this book. So if I forget to say the late Queen, that is who I am referring to. I'm not referring to Camilla at any point during this video. And this is an interesting little snippet about Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen knows more state secrets than any living person, because, of course, when this book was written, the Queen was still alive, okay? So they talk about her in the present tense. And unlike her prime ministers, she keeps them, which is a very good point, really, isn't it? That was one of the unique things about her, and one of the ways she never put a foot wrong. She never said a word out of place. She never said something she shouldn't say. I mean, when have you heard any scandal about something the Queen has said, or supposedly someone she has betrayed? She's never betrayed a confidence. That's unique over 70 years, isn't it? I mean, that's self-discipline, just right there. The Queen is a human library of intelligence history. She knew about the British nuclear weapons program at a remarkably early stage. And so she had this unique sort of relationship with British intelligence services. And it's really interesting that in the 60s, when, you have the awful assassinations of major figures, notably the Kennedys, then at that time, everyone became aware that anyone in the public eye, anyone that held a high stately office, was just so much more at risk. And particularly in Britain, because they didn't used to carry weapons. The people that actually were, charged with protecting the royal family didn't carry weapons. And that was largely due to Prince Philip himself. He refused for them to be armed. And also the Queen was very against visible, heavy security. Now, understandably, in the USA, security just amped up after the two Kennedy brothers were assassinated in the 60s. Really, protection for particularly presidents became very visible. It became very much a show of strength. There was boots on the ground, high numbers. They didn't hesitate to throw their principal to the ground and cover them with their body. I mean, they were very hands-on, very visible. And that was the way they chose to handle it. And look, it's worked. I mean, it's very, very effective way to actually protect their presidents. But the Queen didn't want that. Under no circumstances was any security guy allowed to throw her on the ground at any point. That wasn't going to happen. But not having that large visible sort of armory and guns and boots on the ground, the royal family had to rely on intelligence. Intelligence, the heads up on threats. That was everything. Because if the Queen wasn't going to put barricades and armour between her and her people, she had to rely on really top intelligence to give them the heads up if anything dangerous was going to occur. And to be quite frank, when you read this book, you realise that it was often lacking. It was often hit and miss. And it was often just sheer bloody luck that something didn't happen. One of the first royals to create a major dilemma for security and intelligence services in royalty was, of course, Edward VIII, which ties in with our other two movies. He really, really caused such ructions between the intelligence services and royalty Back in Queen Victoria's time, it was sort of more private networks. Queen Victoria sort of got the heads up from other members of the royal family scattered around the world, and family and friends, and it was all sort of network of spies on the ground. But when it became more professional, Edward nearly ruined it for everybody, because people that he used to be friends with, people that he used to drink with, people that he trusted actually were secretly spying on him, because no one trusted him. The intelligence services didn't trust him, and the government of the day didn't trust him. Now, that trust was very much repaired by the time Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne, probably because her father had a very close relationship with intelligence services, and because they trusted him. They thought that he was steadfast and loyal, and he could be trusted with big secrets. And they did trust him with very great secrets. It says here in this book that King George VI gradually restored trust between the secret world and the House of Windsor. And he actually became involved in several special operations and executive escapades, they're described as. And he enjoyed a personal tour of the gadgets and gizmos, and he also decorated numerous secret agents in secret award ceremonies. In the 1950s, the young Queen Elizabeth II continued her father's fastidious interest in secret state craft, from nuclear bunkers to weekly intelligence assessments. And they used to call her the Gilded Sponge, because she exercised her constitutional right to encourage, warn, and be consulted. Everybody was aware in the 60s and 70s that it was the lone nutcase, which is also probably lone terrorist these days, but the lone nutcase that presented the biggest threat. And you can't really combat against a lone nutcase. You can just take sensible precautions, hope you have the intelligence to get the heads up on something about to unfold. But it was very, very difficult. And many of the Queen's prime ministers have just lost sleep over her safety on many of her overseas jaunts, and also just big, ticket events in Britain itself. A lot of sleep is lost leading up to these events. Now, I'm going to finish off this video with a really entertaining story about the then Prince Charles. And he's at Cambridge, and it's Rag Week. And for those that don't know, Rag Week is just a week where students act up and act like idiots and do lots of, but the purpose of it is for charity. They're supposed to be raising money for charity, and they do raise money for charity. But it is basically a week-long party, lots of drinking and lots of bad behaviour. Rag Week in the famous year of 1968 nearly proved a disaster. And it was Varney that actually protected the then Prince Charles from a group of female Manchester University students. They were all feral women's libbers of the most strident kind, they're described, planned to raid Trinity and kidnap Charles. So what they didn't realise was that they were really about to commit a real, serious crime. A little more is said about it. It was a well-planned operation, almost worthy of professional kidnappers. The Manchester team had not only hired a getaway car, but had also arranged a safe house for their victim. The snatch was assigned to what the police called a squad of Amazons, who were ready for a fight and who were prepared to cart the then Prince Charles off bodily. Now, his loyal guard, Varney, had a sneaking suspicion when he got the heads up on this that actually Charles would have rather enjoyed it. And so he was quite, sympathetic. And he was also politically sympathetic to these girls. But Varney was painfully aware that if the kidnap was successful, it would be my head that rolled in the basket. That was a direct quote from Varney. So Varney was terrified and Charles was titillated. So Varney engineered a meeting with the head of the kidnappers without Charles being any the wiser. So it says here, he warned her that they already had all the details of the plan and that if it went ahead, it would cause a great deal of legal trouble for all those involved. 1968 was not an era of political correctness, and so he offered a stark warning. If you do go ahead and try to pull it off, I will personally see that you won't sit down for a fortnight. So that's what Varney said to this girl. The leader of the kidnappers gave as good as she got. Well, I'm pleased about that. Calling him by all the four-letter names I've ever heard, but in a posh Cheltenham accent. Either way, the Manchester kidnap was off. So Charles never got his excitement. But isn't that fascinating? And there's so many interesting sort of behind the scenes stories of the intelligence services with the Crown from Queen Victoria's time right through to the present day. And I will share another one with you next week. I'll see you then. Bye.